listening to what they hear from their consumers, and then what typically happens is they come up with a policy that's meant to basically, one, appease their shareholders, and two, appease their customers, okay? So they're facing all of this pressure, so despite the fact that many of them have animal welfare programs, and in fact many of them have pretty long-standing programs, it's really seen as not enough. And so a recent tactic is many of the animal activist groups, the Humane Society of the United States is the primary one I'm thinking of here, will tend to get on shareholder boards of these companies, introduce resolutions at their board meetings to, for instance, only if you're dealing with eggs, only buy eggs that are raised cage-free, or only buy chickens or pork that's produced in a certain way, okay? This is actually a very new tactic. What we'd seen before, lots of state-by-state ballot initiatives to regulate animal care and welfare in the respective states. I have got the fun job of actually helping to craft the Ohio state laws on farm animal welfare when I worked for Ohio State University, and I will tell you, I'm only slightly functional after that process because that was traumatic. When that doesn't work, what we've seen is agreements between the industry groups and animal activist groups, right? And so some of you, if you've been paying attention, you've seen an agreement that kind of failed. They had to try to attach it to the Farm Bill, and this was an agreement to basically standardize housing systems for egg-laying chickens, okay? Forged between the HSUS and the United Egg Producers. And now the latest tact is we see, as a result of many of these shareholder resolutions, corporate announcements to phase out certain types of production systems, primarily the gestation stall for pigs. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, I'll show it to you later on. So it's pretty clear animal agriculture is losing the conversation in regards to animal care and welfare, right? In fact, last night, just for fun, and because, well, I'm not depressed enough, I decided to Google animal agriculture and animal care. And I got about 10,000 hits on just the first page that I pulled up. So I thought, yeah, I'll put in factory farming, and then I had to stop because I could have given you the rest of the entire presentation filled with images like this, okay? It's also become commonplace that, for instance, major recognized publications, so the Washington Post oftentimes has commentaries on food animal agriculture, never positive, okay? For those of you, again, who can't read, that's the picture in the middle, who's hogging our antibiotics? Up to 70% of US antibiotics go to farm animals that aren't sick, okay? Where does this come from? This isn't from a rabid animal rights website. That's from the Pew Initiative on industrial farming, okay? So, and this is a really respected committee. It's very influential. And so this is what, for instance, major scientists are putting out there in terms of food animal agriculture. If you look at the picture of Food Inc., I think pretty much everyone does this, so I speak probably in as many philosophy conferences as I do animal sciences conferences. Food Inc. actually has become a teaching resource in the social sciences now. Okay, so a conference I went to this summer and one last year, I think every philosopher, and actually it's kind of funny because philosophers don't typically, at least not in the US, use PowerPoint at all. So the social science philosophers had actually discovered PowerPoint, and then every presentation had a clip from Food Inc. on the topic of sustainable food production. Okay, so this is part of how the conversation starts to get shaped. If you look at what animal agriculture has put out in response to Food Inc., well, okay, another sad test market. Please don't depress me further because I'm about to start weeping up here. Has anybody seen anything from animal agriculture that rivals what's been put out in Food Inc.? Okay, right. I'll just move on then. So, you know, what have we learned? I've given you 3 slides. What have we already learned? I'll go ahead and take your questions now. Oh, you're still looking at me. You must want more. Oh, fine then. All right, how do we get to this point, right? Because if you're in animal agriculture, there are a couple things that we know. What people tell us over and over that they want, at least in the United States, I know we have some guests from the UK, so you all are different. Really different. What do people want? They want cheap food, safe food. They want it there when they want it, and they want it consistently there, okay? What does U.S. animal agriculture deliver? Cheap food, consistent food, safe food. Okay, aside from a little food safety scare every now and then, but seriously, it is safe. And it's there. When you go to the supermarket and you want something, it's pretty much there, right? So that's pretty much a 1-to-1, 100% match in terms of what our customers tell us they want, what we actually deliver. Why are we in this situation? Because at the end of the day, we all have to eat, right? All right, so there's a number of factors. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly so I can get you to some fun stuff. We've had major societal changes in this part of the world in a relatively short period of time, okay? So in about the last couple hundred years, which is actually a fairly short time in terms of human evolution, we've actually had extension of moral consideration to categories of even humans who were previously denied any kind of consideration in terms of being included in who we thought we had obligations to, okay? It is actually natural to start, once you open up the door to who you consider to be in the moral circle, it's actually natural to open up that door and extend it to other entities, including what we're seeing today, which is non-human entities, okay? So no surprises here. Here's the other problem that we run into. There are many, many different conceptions of animal welfare and conflicting ideas on what constitutes good animal welfare, okay? So I'm going to give you a very, very quick primer in animal welfare science for those of you who haven't had this background. There's 3 different ways that you can scientifically think about animal welfare and in fact assess it. So the first one is this idea that animals need to function well, okay? That means they need to be healthy, they need to be growing, staying alive, we think is good for welfare, being in good body condition, being able to move appropriately and so on. You're generally healthy, the structure's functioning well, okay? If you work in animal agriculture, this is the assessment of animal welfare, or this is the priority in animal welfare that has been the major focus at least up until the last 10 years or so, okay? There's a second way of thinking about animal welfare from a scientific perspective, and it's the idea, it's a feelings-based conception of welfare. And it's this idea that animals should be spared from feeling negative emotional states or affective states like pain, frustration, boredom, and they should also have some positive things going on in their lives, right? So they should feel good too. The third conception is this idea that animals ought to live reasonably natural lives, okay? So if I were to ask you right now, what do you think the general public thinks of, or what conception of animal welfare the general public thinks of? How many of you say functioning based? Wow, no takers? I know there's a vet in the room somewhere. Okay, I got one hand, thank you. Feelings? Few of you? Okay, natural living? Yeah, what we find over and over in our data is that the average person thinks of animal welfare as animals feeling good and tending to live natural lives, right? So I've given you an example. It's not a very great picture here in terms of the lighting, but that's a battery cage system for laying hens. And it is actually the standard production system, at least in the United States, for producing eggs and for housing chickens. If you are someone that subscribes to functioning-based conceptions of animal welfare, you will look at these birds and you will think in that housing system, more likely than not, that the birds are doing just fine because they're well fed, they're safe from predators, they're reproducing efficiently, you're getting eggs all the time, right? Production being a parameter in terms of how the animals are functioning. If you subscribe to that feelings-based conception, you may look at the same hens in the same scenario with the same data and think their welfare's poor because they really can't do much in there, okay? They can't possibly feel good. They may be frustrated from doing natural behaviors simply because of the system they find themselves in. And if you're a person who subscribes to that natural living, that animals ought to be able to live reasonably natural lives conception, there is nothing good about the system for you, right? Because there is nothing about the system that emulates the natural ethology of a chicken, okay? So you understand, just from a scientific perspective, you can give people exactly the same scenario and get absolutely no consensus, even by the experts, in terms of whether or not these animals are doing well. Okay, so I want you to think about the uses of animals that you have right now, because remember this slide, we're going to come back to it when we talk about dogs. All right, here's another factor that's come into play recently in terms of shaping public debate and people's thoughts on food animal care and welfare, but also in regards to animals, period, okay, including even the animals that many of us in the room think about. And it's this idea of anthropomorphism, right? Just a couple days ago, many of us engaged in abusive behaviors like this. The behaviorist in me is compelled to tell you we've stripped dogs of their dignity at this point. If you do this to a dog, I guess you can get away with it. If you do this to a cat, you get whatever you deserve. All right, what's the Disney factor? My colleague Wes Jamieson has published about this quite a lot, and he's absolutely right. All right, let me give you a quick test market. How many of you have ever given a child a stuffed animal? Okay. Seen a Disney movie? We are in the right neighborhood for that kind of thing? Okay. All right. What does Disney tell us about animals? They're little people, yeah? They're just like us. What else? They'll sing. They also dance, right? And who doesn't love a good musical? Okay. And the world is good at the end, yes. Anything else Disney tells us about animals? They're warm and fuzzy. Do they have friends? Oh, yeah. And friends don't eat their friends, right? Right? You all are starting to worry me. Depressed and now scared. Okay. What Wes Jamieson will tell you is if anthropomorphism is a disease, you are all vectors, okay? You are passing these messages on to your children that sort of anthropomorphize animals. Now, scientists will tell you anthropomorphism is terrible. If you're a real scientist, you should not be anthropomorphic, right? We had that beaten into us from the minute we implied we might want to be scientists. Anthropomorphism is not terribly bad. It's actually the root basis for all compassion. Without it, there's no reason for us to presume or think about how animals are engaging with the world, right? Because we can never know what their experience is really like for them, okay? So you need a little bit of anthropomorphism. But when you take this to a different level, when the messages you send to people over and over and over, starting from very, very early on, is that animals are basically like little people, you are going to have a hard time dealing with animal welfare later on, particularly when people discover things like, uh-oh, the thing we just drove by that used to be in the field is no longer in the field. Where did that thing go? Oh, it's the hamburger you're about to eat. I don't know a parent who wants to explain that to a child, right? Okay, so this is going to make life a little bit more difficult. Then we have changes in terms of how we interact with animals that's different from what we've seen historically, okay? And we have new relationships with animals than we have ever had before. What people think of as companion animals today are very different from how we've ever seen this before. All right, we're going to do this very, very quickly. Who here has a pet? I know I'm in the right audience for this. And you're going to play along, right? Because even my beef cattle producers play these games with me, although they look at me sideways when I ask them these questions. Okay, who loves their pet? Who thinks their pet loves you? Oh, I have to do this. Oh, I'm going to have to rush. I have to do this. How do you know? Kisses. They give you kisses? Okay. They cuddle with you? What else? They choose to be with you. They wag their tails. Anything else? Oh, they come find you when the thunder's loud. Yeah, Ken? They protect your territory. Oh. They sleep in bed with you. Okay. All right, anything else? Arnie? They know when you feed them. You all have very odd definitions of love, by the way. It's all about the food. Okay, some of you are jaded.
When I get home after being out of town, there's always on my welcome mat some either beaks or feathers or feet.
Oh,
soft tissue is removed.
That's awesome. They bring you presents. Yeah, that's great. And that's how we know people love us. Yeah.
One of my birds, when I'm gone, sits very quietly in his cage, won't go to the outdoor aviary, he'll play in the box, I'll hide in the corner. And when I come home, he'll go back to his normal happy self.
Oh, this is lovely. I love this audience. Usually the food animal people I deal with, they are horrified at this point that we've actually gone off of science and we're talking about how we feel about animals. It becomes incredibly important. One of the conversation pieces I'm going to talk to you about later on is about how you feel about animals and translating that. So this is great. Okay, let's see, what else? Who here celebrated a pet's birthday? Who celebrated a pet's birthday? Okay, a few of you. Yeah, some of you are starting to look ashamed. This is the way this normally goes. All right, here's your test. Who here refers to yourself as your pet's mom or dad, or knows someone who does? Even the person sitting next to you at the table who is not raising their hand right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, know someone. Okay, so several of you are outing your neighbors. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I have to tell you, you are as crazy as everybody else is about their animals. And that's fine, because in developed Western nations, this is the direction we're all moving into, okay? And so for many people, Think about animal welfare this way. It's not just about the animals. It's about what the animals come to represent for us, right? Treasured relationships. It's about, for instance, that dog becomes for many people, let's say, a spouse. The spouse who won't leave you for someone younger, cuter, with a bigger bank account, right? That cat becomes the child who's not going to sass you and 5 seconds later ask you for money, right? Okay, what animals start to represent to us, and it's largely based on the interactions we're having with the animals we experience day to day, whether they're directly in our homes, whether they're through the media, whether they're animals that we see at zoos and so on and so forth. What these relationships start to become to us are representative of ideal relationships with other humans, okay? And so this becomes incredibly important in terms of setting the groundwork for how we start thinking about animals and how we start thinking about how we ought to interact with animals. Okay? You take the dog as a test case. The dog has moved from the barnyard to the backyard to the bedroom to the point where we have human-animal interaction studies that will show us people will tolerate their dog on the bed more than they'll tolerate their partner. They'll tolerate their dog's bad breath, but they won't tolerate their partner's. Okay? And if I were to ask you right now, who's man's best friend, what would you tell me? Dog. Not one audience has ever gotten this right. It's women. Learn that line. Okay, people, you're depressing me for multiple reasons this morning. All right, when these are the relationships we have with animals, they become the paradigm for how we think about, view, and value other animals, okay? This is the ethics portion that I'm sliding in here. So you're getting philosophy masquerading as entertainment. This is how this stuff happens, okay? So when you establish these kinds of caring, valued, treasured relationships that are symbolic, you want to protect them. These entities, because they're so valuable to you, become vulnerable entities that you really become invested in. Understand that this is where a lot of that angst comes from when we're starting to deal with animal welfare and animal rights issues, okay? And if you are concerned about the animals that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, you are more likely than not to be concerned over animal treatment in general, even for uses of animals you have nothing to do with, okay? This is why you can care about that polar bear that you will never meet. This is why you can care about that whale you will never see, that farm animal that you will probably visit at the supermarket at some point in time, okay? Even though you have no direct connection to that. And when this becomes your basis, it becomes the impetus to regulate practices about animal care and welfare in general. Okay? And this is the phenomenon that we're seeing happening now and now. And one of the things that we know, and in fact we have some data that we just recently submitted for publication, is that if you are a pet owner, at any level, it does not matter what the pet is, you are more likely than not to be interested in this kind of issue and be willing to do something about it. All right. And we know this is true because here's the level of legislation. By the way, this is a short and incomplete slide on some of the legislation we've seen passed just in regards to regulating food animal welfare only in the last 10 years or so, okay? I'm not going to go into any of these in any great details, just to give you the visual. This is the truncated version of what we've been doing, okay? Today, despite all of the problems we have, virtually every legislator in the state will tell you, we see it in Indiana, we see it in fact in DC, the issue that people get more letters about, more complaints about, more concerns about, it's animal welfare, okay? All right, think about all the other social issues we're dealing with. That tells you something that is incredibly important. All right, here's another factor that comes into play. We have more information than we've ever had before on animal behavior. We know things about animal intelligence, and it's brought to us very easily thanks to the beauty of Google, Animal Planet, National Geographic. We know things about science we've never known before, and it starts to erase the borders in terms of how different animals are from us and how different they are even from each other, okay? So, yeah, that's a pig working on a computer. That's actually my research. I apologize. I did not know when I was a budding graduate student that that would be used in, ways you'll see later on in this presentation. But if we've historically thought about smart animals being the ones that we have obligations to protect, now those lines are starting to be blurred as we know more about other animals that are not that terribly different in terms of their mental abilities, things they can learn, things they can do, that start to blur the lines for us, okay? And so as animal behavior becomes better understood, our perceived obligations to those animals change. And you know this, and some of you actually subscribe to this kind of thought process, because if I were to ask you right now, who's the smartest animal out there? What would you tell me? It's a terrible question, by the way. It's a total setup. Really? Pigs? Pretend you didn't see that pig working on a computer. Really? What do you think the average person would tell me? Dogs. Okay, who else? Chimpanzees. Anything? Dolphins? Yeah. Okay, we're not talking about humans. We're really not that smart. You'll see later on why that's not true. Nice try, though. Thank you. It's the big-brained animals, right? The ones that tend to be more like us that we think of as smarter. Now, if I were to ask you, how many of you think turkeys are really intelligent? Oh, see, that just got a laugh. This makes me sad again. What was that? Oh, wild or domestic? Oh, I like that. Someone knows something about the turkey. Well, let's go domestic. Yeah, okay, lost that one. Dang it. Sheep? No, really? No? Oh, well, we have a study that sheep can remember a face they've seen only one time before, 5 years later, and they can do it out of a sample of 350. I guarantee you there's people in this room who can't perform that well. I would be one of those people. Interesting. The smarter we think an animal is, the less likely we are to want to subject it to certain uses, right? This is why we have debates about things like the Great Ape Project, to assign personhood to apes so that we can stop using them in biomedical research. It's why you hear outrage about whaling issues, right? Dolphin hunting and fishing or trapping accidentally in terms of the fishing industries, okay? Yeah. How many of you would be delighted to announce to your friends and family that you eat dogs and you really want to keep doing that? Not if you want to be a good neighbor, not be run out of town on a rail, right? Yeah, and that has to do a little bit with our history with the dog, but also because we think dogs are intelligent. So the animals, for instance, that we think are not that smart, and we've arbitrarily categorized into they go for certain uses, we're okay with some of the things we do to them, including using them for food, again, in a developed Western nation. Depending on what part of the world you find yourself, this may change, right? So some of this goes back to how intelligent we think animals are. All right. Other factors that shape the conversation that we're having and people's thought processes about animal care and welfare. Animal abuse scandals. Part of that bio that you got read, I am one of the so-called experts, and that's literally how I'm quoted described in some of the disparaging animal rights periodicals that report on this stuff. But yeah, I'm one of the experts that gets to review these fabulous undercover videos, and I have to tell you, they're not all staged. There are some bad things happening on our farms, okay? So while I don't like that people are holding on to videos for shock value and so on, what I will tell you is thank God someone's making these videos, because we would not know what's happening on our farms in the United States if not for that, okay? That said, it's illegal what's going on there. So the problem is, why is there impetus and continued impetus to do this? And it's because sometimes there's truth in what they're finding. But here's the deal. When you get a series of animal abuse scandals in an industry over and over and over, and what you're trying to do is set the paradigm that we don't need to be regulated, we don't need to be legislated, you can trust us to basically manage our own house, this is going to undermine whatever credibility you have. Okay? And so philosopher Bernie Rowland, some of you will be very familiar with his work, will tell you if society believes that you're not regulating yourself, they will absolutely take steps to do that for you. And this is exactly what we're seeing in the food animal industries. We've seen it historically in the biomedical sciences, and we're starting to see it in different areas. Here's some of the things we've learned from these experiences, okay? People in general, consumers in general, are bombarded with negative information. And they've got very specific concerns and dislikes regarding animals we use for food, but this also translates across other animal species. They don't like the idea of animals in boxes, okay? Or in housing systems that look like boxes and cages. They don't like the idea that we're cutting bits and pieces off of animals. They absolutely don't like the idea that animals might be in pain, and they don't like the idea that animals are being hurt or killed, even if it benefits humans, okay? Most people have no idea about anybody's efforts to address animal welfare, unless you're an animal protection group. And their main sources of information, and bring us to the extra depressing part of the program. Let's go to data. This is from a study we just recently published, where we asked people where they get their information on animal welfare. And this study was a little bit different from some other studies, because usually what we do is ask people to tell us where they get their information, and this time we gave them the option to say, I just don't have a source, okay? Over half of the population tells us they have no information source for animal welfare. In an era of social media, in an era where we've got Google to make us overnight experts on everything, most people have no source of information on animal welfare. But here's the extra depressing part. When they can identify a source, it is the Humane Society of the United States and PETA. okay? We've done this study for multiple years. Every single year we do this study. Those are the only two organizations that jump out. AVMA, USDA, sorry, Chester. Put those together, you still don't even come near to what PETA, who's actually lost a lot of their credibility with the public, that's because they've marginalized themselves into the extra crazy land, okay? And then left a gap that was very, very quickly and very efficiently filled by the Humane Society of the United States, right? When someone makes themselves so crazy they marginalize themselves from the conversation, they open up the door for another group to come in. And that is exactly what the HSUS group has done very, very effectively. But yeah, if you look at every industry group, if you look at all of our social media and so on combined, it doesn't come near to those who don't have a source on animal welfare or even to the two animal protection organizations that people primarily think of, okay? This is absolutely going to change the conversation on animal welfare in and of itself. So I told you, we're starting to see these concerns extend across species, right? We have lots and lots of animal welfare issues, many of them very, very real issues, many of them coming to the public forum, coming to the domain, because clearly the people who are coming into people's homes, who are presenting information, who are seen as the credible experts on animal welfare, are bringing these issues to light. And you see how this now becomes important for those of you in the room, because you're starting to see these same concerns that we've seen about animal agriculture, about biomedical research and so on, showing up all over the place, okay? Ban puppy stores, no circus elephants. For those of you who can't read that line on the bottom, for the pictures of the different animals, do any of these animals look like you? They don't react like you either. That's a slam against using animals as models for human medicine. And it talks about vivisection is scientific fraud and we're all victims, okay? This is what we're seeing. All right, now, I'm going to bring this right back. So think about all the issues I've given you, what you've seen in the food animal sector, and here's what we're seeing in regards to an industry that is probably near and dear to many of your hearts. Puppy breeding in general, dog breeding in general, commercial dog breeding in particular. That image to the left is probably one of the nicer images many people are exposed to in regards to this type of animal production. Okay? Why is this topic so contentious? And there's a number of reasons for that. One, we've all heard over and over and over about overpopulation of cats and dogs, the high euthanasia rates we have of them. Okay, so APPA tells us there's more than 78 million pet dogs in the United States, and we're euthanizing at least 4 million of them each year. Okay, those numbers alone are going to be staggering and off-putting for people. Then we have this idea of the social construction of the dog. So in Western developed nations, particularly in the United States, the dog has basic significant meaning to us. Okay? And many of us have lots of long-standing affiliations with dogs, happy memories of dogs. And if you look at, for instance, our media, dogs are represented very widely. Okay? 46% of US households own dogs. Then you've got this other idea about the contentious nature of animal welfare issues in general. Okay? So if you're in the food animal sector and you're dealing with this and you think, I'm safe, I deal with cats and dogs, this is not my issue, you are completely wrong, because the fact that that ugly conversation is occurring over there means you're going to have it, you're probably already having it. What else makes this issue so mind-bogglingly difficult for people? Part of it is it's a multi-level question, right? There's ethics questions. First of all, should puppy mills be allowed to exist? I'm going to call them puppy mills because I'm not a fan of sanitized language. I say use what people know about and talk them through it, okay? Should they be allowed to exist? We have never had that conversation in society today, and we certainly have never had a civilized conversation about it. Is there something inherently wrong about commercial breeding of dogs? Dog breeding has never been illegal. Is there something inherently bad about it? Okay. So then that can't be the issue. So let's look at the science question. Is it that it's how we're raising these animals and producing these animals that's the issue? And many people will tell you yes, but that's not a real honest answer. What are the specific welfare issues? Do we know what they are? You know, if we're talking about promoting the care and well-being of these dogs, what standards promote their optimal well-being, right? Well, then you've got this regulatory issue. What even constitutes a puppy mill? What is it? Is it the number of dogs? Is it the number of breeding dogs? Is it the number of puppies you sell? Okay, so there are people who have very different ideas about all of these issues in society today. And then the question becomes, Dr. Gibson, good luck with this. How do you regulate and enforce standards? Because we know no matter what you do, someone's screaming, you're not doing it well, you're not doing it enough, right? Okay. Or you're doing it too much. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I told you, you're going to be crazy if you work in this. It doesn't matter where you stand, the crazy will hit you at some point. So you've got all of this stuff that's involved, right? And so let's look at, what's in commercial dog breeding standards right now. And if you look at what typically is in there, you see the same things over and over. Housing, sanitation, nutrition, health, a little bit on reproductive management, not enough for some people, okay? What's often underplayed in there? Behavior. As someone who used to see behavior cases for about the last 10 years, I can tell you, this is really problematic. It is a low priority in most standards and even relatively in most laws in the states that actually have laws that govern this type of production. Okay? And this is hugely problematic because behavioral wellness is a major component of the human-animal bond, and as we all know, unlike those food animals I was talking to you about before, dogs have to function as long-term family members and good citizens in order to stay in their homes, right? So even if you subscribe to the functional only or primarily idea of animal welfare, if you are not taking care of the behavioral component, particularly with this species, you're in big trouble, right? Okay, nothing makes people more crazy than this, because this is one of those areas where people start to think about, I don't care if those animals are healthy, and besides, we assume they're not healthy because of what we see over and over. But even if you tell me they're healthy, I'm going to tell you those animals may be crazy. They may not be behaviorally sound, okay? And so this is why it's important to ask the question, is commercial dog breeding acceptable if you protect animal welfare? And if you can ensure that it's regulated and really people comply with what's put into place, right? So you absolutely have to look at the physical, the behavioral, and the emotional components that go into this type of operation, right? It's not enough to take care of nutrition and animal health. It's not enough to take care of housing. You really have to think about your husbandry procedures, the management, what you do with those animals. And here's a really important part. You have to have a behavioral management plan. And if you don't have one, people are going to start critiquing this, okay? And the other important point that we need to see is educating the people who are involved in these systems so that they understand what's important to the dog, why it matters, and why certain things are in standards or being proposed in standards. But it also comes back to making these things workable and not burdensome for the people who are raising these animals, right? So this is something that we're trying to work on in Indiana, is to actually establish standards for commercially bred dogs that are reasonable, that work for breeders, but also ultimately work for dogs, and therefore should theoretically work for society, right? Now I give you the caveat. Remember that slide I gave you on the 3 different conceptions of welfare? Even if we do that, you may have people who decide, and it's a free society, so they're allowed to decide this, that even if you take care of animal health, even if you take care of some aspects of natural living, I don't know that the dogs feel that great, so I may not support that type of production anyway, okay? So this is where you may do everything right and still run into that little issue. So I tell you this so that you know that probably is coming, but without doing it, it's a sure thing, okay? All right. Very, very quickly to wrap up, let me tell you a little bit about this conversation we're having and how it's being shaped and how it impacts you. All right, here's some key strategies of animal protection groups. You identify core values and you appeal to them. What are some core values? Things like compassion, right? You're talking about animals, compassion for animals. Justice, doing the right thing by animals, being fair to them, okay? Freedom. What you do is you oppose anything and you deliberately use language that talks about opposing cruelty, indifference, and sometimes if you want to be highly offensive, you refer to terms like enslavement, okay? Pick issues that are visible and easy for people to understand. So you look at things like housing, handling, animals in pain, because you don't need a lot of words to convey that. One good image does it. And that is why at 2 in the morning, when I'm watching those dreadful, dreadful commercials about animals, whether they're from the HSUS, whether they're from ASPCA, you know, they stick in my head and may make my insomnia even worse, okay? You focus on animals' ability to suffer and feel pain, and you do it and tie it to, and they do this in the same way that humans can. Remember one of those things I told you people don't like? Don't like animals in boxes, don't like bits and pieces coming off of animals, don't like animals in pain, okay? This is why you see this issue hammered over and over. You develop modest appeals for change, right? Because again, you've learned your lesson. If you start sounding crazy, you'll get marginalized out of the conversation, right? So you sound modest and moderate. You adopt the moral high ground. Once you plant your flag as this is the right thing to do and we are the right people, You get to set the conversation from here on out. Everybody else is playing defense and catch-up. This is exactly what we've seen in the food-animal arena, okay? When, for instance, Proposition 2 was first proposed in California, the question that was put to the public is, shouldn't these animals just be allowed to turn around, okay? Reasonable, modest reform. To the average person, that's exactly what it sounds like. And in truth, it's modest. It is reasonable. The problem is it's difficult to implement, okay? Not impossible. That it's not logistically impossible to do. This is a very reasonable request. But the people who proposed this knew exactly how hard this would be to actually do in real life, right? And so agriculture responded exactly the way agriculture should not have responded. They didn't address the ethical dimensions of animal care at all. They didn't address the ethical challenge that was thrown down. They didn't pick up that gauntlet in terms of what does it mean to do right by animals. Instead, we did really brilliant things for a very long time. We sent messages back about food safety and nutrition, and people started to get really ticked off at us. It's kind of like when you're listening to those political debates and someone asks someone a question and they respond with their talking points and then they keep doing that. Yeah. Anybody want to just throw something at the TV when you're watching those? This is what we had been doing to people for the longest time. Really effective approach. You amplify guilt and cognitive dissonance. How many of you here eat animal products? How many of you delight in the idea that animals are butchered, slaughtered, tortured, cruelly raised, and so on to get that steak you had last night for dinner? I told you those people are different. Most of us feel bad about this kind of thing. We don't like to think we do these things, okay? And so, if you already feel a little guilty that something has to die so that you can eat, well, here you go. I can make that better for you, and I can make it profitable for me, okay? So I amplify the guilt and the cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that comes with that idea, okay? And therein you see the idea for campaigns. How can you love some animals but be indifferent to the suffering of others? Why love one but eat the other? All right, remember that pig research, pigs on computers I told you about before? Okay, there's a little factoid in there. It said, the curious and insightful pigs are the smartest domestic animal in the world with intelligence beyond that of a 3-year-old human child. That actually comes from my research. I'm sorry, I did not say that. A reporter actually came in and wrote that, and it just got repeated over and over again. Oh, here's part of the conversation. Say it enough, it becomes true, right? I also read, because my research was actually cited both in Science magazine, and I believe it was the Inquirer at the same time. So that the pigs actually ran the lab and wrote my thesis. They actually did run the lab, but they were slackers when it came to writing the thesis, so that part wasn't really true. But here's the thing. Amplify guilt, make people cognitively uncomfortable with how we treat animals, and then what you do is you can empower people to act, right? And how should they act? Donate or vote, okay? You can give me money, and I will make this problem go away for you. Or, for those of you cheapskates, and we know you're all out there, voting's still free in this country, okay? That's how this works. All right, recurrent errors made in animal agriculture. Allowing other people to set the welfare agenda, okay? We have been talking in the food animal sector about housing of animals over and over and over as though this is the only welfare issue we have. We have other welfare issues, many of them just as pressing, some of them more important, and while we play catch up on this issue, we are not attending to those other issues. Dismissing animal welfare concerns as irrational or emotional. Yeah. The idea that science alone is going to set the agenda and run the agenda is madness on stilts right now. No one cares about the science at this point except for the scientists. Okay? Legislators oftentimes don't understand the science, and frankly, scientists do a lot of what I do just as much, even though I know better, which is if they had any interest in a topic, we'll talk to them because we are such geeks, we are so interested in what we do, we want to give people every last bit of information. If they had a bit of interest in the first place, well, we will bore the heck out of them. We will bore them into a coma, they'll have no idea what we're talking about, and they'll be sorry they asked the question, right? So who are they going to go to? Oh, the only recognizable sites on animal welfare to get the facts that we bored out of them, right? Who were they again? HSUS and PETA, right? Awesome. Complacency and protecting the status quo. The idea that what we're doing is fine, people are just gonna have to get on with it, suck it up, we're gonna do what we do. That doesn't work. Insisting on science as the sole basis for decisions. Oh, here's another one. Relying on PR to address animal welfare issues. PR is to animal welfare as a Band-Aid is to a gunshot wound, okay? Yeah, it's about as useful. It will help you, particularly if you're in a bad situation. It will not address the problem. And so if there's a welfare problem and that problem goes unaddressed, you PR people out there will thank you because you keep them with job security when you take that approach. Addressing the actual welfare issues is the thing that gets animal activists off your back. And oftentimes we don't do a brilliant job of that. Here's what we also don't do. While we're shooting ourselves in the foot on the one end, we are jumping into craters on the other end. We do a lot of good for animals, and we don't tell people that effectively. And when we tell it to them, well, we tell it to them the wrong way, in the wrong places, on those websites they're not going to. And oftentimes we use the wrong people to tell it to them. The boring scientist, the person who does bad things to animals and wants to tell people, look, you're lucky you have something on your plate, you'll eat what I give you, and your questions and concerns are stupid, okay? Oh yeah, that's gonna go over well, right? So we can't do stuff like that. This slide I like to refer to as the how not to say dumb things. If you already have a credibility deficit, don't say dumb stuff when you're already in trouble, okay? And I can say this because these are my people. If you say this about my folks that I work with and love dearly, even though sometimes they make me want to scream, we're gonna have a problem. All right. Here's what happened in regards to a sow housing issue, and that is a gestation stall system. For those of you who've heard that term, don't really know what that looks like, okay? So one of our leaders, I won't cite who it is, made the comment, so our animals can't turn around for the 2.5 years they're in stalls. I don't know who asked the sow if she wanted to turn around. That sounds sensitive, right? Like I can trust you to really take care of your animals and think about the experiences she's having. Okay, all right. Well, here's the response from Matthew Prescott from the Humane Society of the United States. It doesn't take a scientist to look at a situation where an animal is crammed in such a tight space they can't even turn their own body around, just maybe shift a little to the left or the right. We know that farmers can do better. Okay, evil genius in terms of response, right? Compassion for animals, appealing to justice and fairness, throw out a compliment to the not very bright person who just said the thing that gave you PR gold, right? And now you also dismiss scientists out of the equation altogether. It doesn't take a scientist to come up with this stuff, right? You don't need us big geeks who are going to tell you all the facts and factoids. Anyone with common sense can see that's wrong. This is how you work your way out of this conversation. All right, here's some ineffective messages. Positioning animal care as an economic issue rather than an ethical obligation. We take care of our animals because if we didn't, we wouldn't make any money. We have said this over and over in animal agriculture, okay? This implies that the sole reason for care of animals is profit. That's a big mistake. Because here's the subtext. If profit goes away, care goes away, right? You just told that to people. No one said it for you. You volunteered that. That's a message that sounds good in your head, shouldn't ever get said out loud. If you are in the business of producing puppies today, you may not send that message. Here's how we communicate more effectively on these issues. We need to build relationships on a mutual ethic of social responsibility, including our responsibility to animals, and we need to make sure that that ethic of care and the idea of our responsibilities is very, very clearly communicated, okay? When we're giving people information, we need to just give them information. They don't need to know our agendas. They just need to know what they want to know, okay? So that they can make choices that they're comfortable with. Transparency of practices. This goes right back to what we're trying to do in terms of setting standards for commercially bred dogs. You know what? We shouldn't be having to explain what we're doing, but here's the thing. No one believes you're flapping gums. Show them. Show them what you're doing. Show them your good animal care standards. Show them that in practice in real life, okay? Discussing acceptable quality of life for animals. Animal welfare ultimately is about quality of life for animals. If we cannot articulate what is acceptable quality of life for animals, we are always going to be playing catch up in a conversation where someone else has set the welfare agenda, okay? And then language matters. We want to focus on the animals, not their products, not profit. When you're talking about animal welfare, those last two are absolutely irrelevant. The conversation needs to stay focused, okay? And oftentimes, that's where we go wrong. All right, I'm going to shut up and take your questions if you have any. I think we're out of time. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.